You have built something real. Clients, revenue, you've invested in the strategy, and yet you still keep hitting the same revenue ceiling. If that is you, this episode is for you. By the end, you will know exactly what is creating that ceiling, why your strategy will never fix it, and what actually moves it. If you leave now and you go back to optimizing your offer or your funnel, you will keep hitting that ceiling again because the solution cannot be found in your strategy. You already have a name for what is happening, and the name that you actually have is actually why you're still stuck. You say that it's self-sabotage or fear of success, even imposter syndrome. And these things are very real. And these are also things that I help my clients with, okay? But they're only symptoms. And to this point, you have been treating the symptom, and that's why the root hasn't moved. Here's what's actually true. You cannot outperform an identity that is not aligned with the level you are reaching for. If God's called you to it, He requires a different woman. And that is why you can have the strategy, you can have the audience, you can have the offer, everything in place, and still can't explain why you can't break through. The infrastructure is right? It is the being that is underneath it that's misaligned. And this is not a strategy or a confidence problem. It is an identity problem. It is a different diagnosis with a different solution. So the ceiling wasn't necessarily handed to you. It is definitely something that you built yourself, okay? And that same pattern is also what helped you build success, okay? So you've proved yourself. You've over-delivered. You've made yourself indispensable, likable, safe to invest in, right? And that pattern worked, and it built something real. But inside of it is a belief system that's now running your business without your consent. And that belief is being liked, is being safe. And approval is currency that opens doors, right? And so I call her the good girl. And at this point, her ways are definitely disguised because being a good girl causes you to people please, and people pleasing looks like wisdom. It can look like stewardship, but here is how she shows up for you right now. You find yourself holding your rate, for your legacy client because you want their win attached to you, or you don't necessarily want to have the conversation of, hey, I raised my rates. Are you still in? Okay. You tone down your hot takes and your content because you're too busy micromanaging how people will perceive you. This one I'm too familiar with. All right. Or when a client doesn't renew, you end up spending days actually trying to process, what it means about you instead of receiving it as neutral. It's just information. Or you celebrate yourself quietly, or you add a disclaimer, all because you're too busy tracking how people around you will perceive it, and you pray that they don't see you as a threat. Or maybe you keep exceeding your offer scope because in your mind, you think that being indispensable is the same as being valuable. Well, founder, each of those has an associated dollar as well as power, okay? And together they make your ceiling. So your inner good girl doesn't disappear just because you became successful. No, she actually gets more sophisticated because she has a lot more to protect. And she is the one that has been helping you to build this ceiling one reasonable sounding decision at a time. David danced before the Lord with everything he had, full, wild, unedited. And Michal watched from the window, composed, dignified, disgusted. She called it shameful. God called it worship. The question isn't whether you'll be criticized for being fully yourself. The question is, whose window have you been performing for? Because right now, there is a version of you quoting lower prices, crossing your own boundaries, and editing the boldest thing God called you to say. And she has been running your business long enough. Join me for Undignified. Lay the good girl to rest. It's free, 5 days, April 20th through the 24th. This is not a ladies' prayer brunch. This is a memorial. RSVP for the service. Scan the QR on the screen or click the link below. For women of faith like you, this pattern has a specific flavor, okay? It gets dressed up in spiritual language, and that is what makes it actually harder to detect and see, okay? So when the good girl tells you to lower your rate as a woman of faith, she calls it you being a blessing. When she tells you to soften your content, she calls it wisdom. When she tells you to, it's okay, go ahead and bend your boundary, she calls it grace. She has learned your vocabulary and now she's using it against you. Galatians chapter 1 verse 10 says, if I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Paul does not hedge. That pattern is allegiance to a different master. The good girl is not a matter of being humble in spirit. She is actually an allegiance problem. Now, let's use God as our case study, okay? Before God said, let there be light, he was. Before he fashioned Adam from the earth, God told Adam who he was. Being came first. And that sequence is actually the architecture of kingdom work, of how it truly functions. So that means that you have to be something before you can be placed. And then placed before you receive the assignment, and assigned before doing produces fruit. Okay? That's the Genesis order. Being, placement, assignment, and then doing. At this point in your journey, you have been doing from the wrong being, okay? The good girl cannot build what the assigned woman is called to build, okay? Your next revenue goal will not flow, and the edge of the authority that you feel trying to rise up to take center stage, it will not land. And it's not because your strategy is wrong. It is all because the being underneath it is misaligned with the assignment that is above it. Doing always follows being, okay? And you cannot strategize your way into a level that requires a different identity. And the identity must shift first. And that shift is not a mere mindset adjustment. It's a burial. One of my community members actually slid into my DMs because she found herself, she kept hitting the same revenue ceiling of 3.9 thousand 3 consecutive months within cents of the same number, okay? Strategy was not her problem, okay? And she told me that she knew she was at a new edge, okay? She told me that she talked to her business besties. They gassed her up, telling her that she was doing great. But for her, she knew that something was off, okay? She had already refined her offer. She already tweaked her messaging, okay? She had already invested in the business coaching. But guess what? She kept hitting that same ceiling, okay? It wouldn't move because the identity underneath it didn't move. What shifted was not a new tactic. I asked her one question. If you were to know what needs to shift for you to break through, what shift are you making? Okay. This is a question that's actually meant to bypass the conscious mind. Okay. For Tiffany, It was an immediate decision. She knew that she needed to be more vulnerable because she was hiding behind her results, never truly in her authority or owning her genius. And guess what? Clarity began to flow. Her rates increased. And guess what? Her content subsequently became more potent. And within 30 days, her revenue doubled, not from a script, from settled identity. The ceiling didn't break from the outside. It dissolved from the inside. And founder, if this episode landed, undignified is the room where we give your good girl notice to vacate, honey, okay? It's 5 days free, April 20th through the 24th on Telegram, and we're doing a live call on day 5. We name the good girl, we follow the money, honey, okay? And we get rooted in what scripture has to say on this matter. You walk out saying RIP to choosing the glory of man over the glory of God, because your peace, your authority, and your assigned wealth are no longer negotiable. I want you to scan the QR or click the link in the description. Because founder, the ceiling is not your destiny. By no means. All right. Now that you know what is actually causing your revenue ceiling, in this episode, I'm going to show you exactly how to dismantle it, starting with the 3 places it shows up in your business right now. Okay. Founder, remember, you can stay successful or you can be a woman of wild wealth. Bye for now.